Okay, well, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to this online event, which is taking place virtually at the Centre for the Study of Cultural Memory, which is a part of the University of London's Institute of Languages, Cultures and Societies. And my name is Joe Ford, and I'll be chairing today's session, and I work at the Institute. Before getting started, I should let you know that today's event is being recorded so that those who can't make it today can catch up later. So you just need to know that if you do participate in the discussion today, you might be featured on that recording. If you don't wish to be recorded, then you can always use the chat function to ask any questions when we come to the Q&A at the end. Please also note that you should be able to have closed captions at the bottom of your screen, and you can activate this by clicking on the kind of more button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. So if you would like, these are automatic captions that are generated by Zoom, so if you like that, that's absolutely fine. So today we're here to discuss and really celebrate the work of the poet and academic Debasish Lahiri, and in particular his most recent collection of poems published with Red River Press under the title Tether That Light. And we had the great pleasure of welcoming Debasish to Senate House Library at the University of London back in October this year. And there we really experienced firsthand the creative, ekphrastic practices that the poet deploys in this new collection of poetry, which, as we'll see and hear today, takes as its main focus a collection of Indian miniature paintings from the 16th and 17th centuries. And as the poet writes in introducing Tether That Light, the aim was to write the light of these miniature paintings, to birth them afresh in ink, to roll up pigment and brush into pen. So what we have here is a contemporary collection of 41 poems that reach back into an immemorial past in order to situate what we might call a poetics of painting in the politically striated present, which ultimately offers a vision of a living tradition that permeates every sphere of life, from the mundane to the spiritual. And here with us today to discuss this collection of poems, we have the poet himself, Debasish Lahiri, who's coming in from Kolkata in India. And I just wanted to introduce Debasish before I move on to the panelists who will speak today. So Debasish Lahiri is a poet and academic working from Kolkata, and his previous poetry publications include First Will and Testament, which came out in 2012, No Waiting Like Departure, 2016, Tinder Tender, Poems of Love and Loitering from 2018, Poppies in the Post and Other Poems from 2020, and Paysages sans Verbes, which is a French translation of his selected poetry, which came out in 2021 with the Algerian publisher Apik. And Debasish is the recipient of the Prix-du-Merite Naji Naaman Literary Prize from 2019. So we'll also be hearing today from three esteemed panelists, including Richard David Williams, who is Senior Lecturer in Music and South Asian Studies at SOAS, University of London. And Richard is a cultural historian of early modern and colonial India, and his research explores the connections between music, literature, and aesthetics. Pradipta Mukherjee is Associate Professor in the Department of English at Vidyasagar College for Women, which is part of the University of Calcutta. And she is a film critic, with her areas of expertise being Shakespeare adaptations and Bollywood. And she's also a member of the advisory board of Inspirare Arts Foundation. Yogesh Patel, MBE, is a renowned poet and has published international contemporary poetry since the 70s. Currently, Yogesh runs the Word Masala project to promote writers and poets of the South Asian diaspora. And he also edits Skylark and writes a regular column for Confluence. So thank you all very much indeed for joining us online today. The way we're going to run the session today is that the panelists will have about 10 to 15 minutes to speak and kind of reflect on the poetry. We'll then go to Debasish Lahiri, the poet, for a response, and we'll then open to question and answers from the audience. So please do feel free as we go along to post your comments or questions in the chat, and I'll try and pick up on these at the end. You're also welcome during the Q&A at the end to unmute yourself and to come on screen. Just know, as I said before, that you will be part of the recording if you do choose to come on screen. So first of all, we're going to hear from Richard Williams, who will be talking about the history of painted poetry in the Indian context, and then we'll pass over to the other panelists. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to you, Richard. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Joseph. Hello, everyone. Namaskar. Looking forward to this discussion. And again, congratulations to Debasish on a really fantastic collection. I hugely enjoyed it and have lots to say about it, but I'll try to keep to time. I could talk about this at length because it's such an exciting and unusual collection. I say that because from my perspective, so as Joseph said, I work on early modern India. I'm interested in poetry and how poetry connects up with music and painting. So when I first heard about this collection, I was very excited because I was hoping to see a contemporary poet engaging with that longer history, and that's definitely what I found with Debashish's work. But at the same time, I think what's appealing about these poems is how they don't just enter into conversation with the past, they are also doing something very fresh and new as well. So I'm going to pull out a few things that I appreciated about it, primarily from this perspective of a longer history of engaging with paintings through poetry. So I just wanted to start off with a line from one of the poems, Death by Dawn, which I found particularly striking and moving. So soon, my arabesque on thin air with a silken tackle tied, for God to find me when he shuttles his loom of light will begin. Night yields the floor to me, and that distant man opens his mouth slightly as words, now grown heavy, fall out like dead moths or silence. So this was a remarkable and unusual painting, and I think Debashish's meditations on it are really insightful, moving and challenging. I think here in this particular phrase, the things that I think are quite helpful for us to get this conversation going is how there is a very gentle gesture to this longer history of ghazal poetry, of Persianate language and imagery. And when we think, of course, about the ghazal, and apologies to those of you who know all of this much better than me, we are thinking about pain and the pain in love, a sublime love, a relationship between the self and the other, and the ecstasy, but also pain of annihilation, the annihilation of the self. And so what I thought was particularly striking here was how these themes, which are beautiful but painful, are gestured at and brought in subtly to reflect on this very traumatic image. In particular here, if we look at the end, the dead moths coming, the words emerging from this man who can no longer speak in his death. Moths, of course, are hugely implicated in ghazal poetry. They are drawn to the light, but they burn themselves in that light. And now those moths are the silence, yet also the heavy words that are now unspoken. And I think that's quite interesting, you know, this sort of reflection on the dead moth rather than the moth that is drawn to the intensity of the flame in the first place. To me, it suggests that perhaps this imagery is not so sublime after all. Perhaps it is actually still a painful human tragedy. So to me, there is a tension here that Debasish is conjuring between the transcendence of leaving this mortal coil, the arabesque, the thin air, but also the heaviness of loss and death. Perhaps overreading it, but that's never a bad thing. I'm also struck by God here with a lowercase g, without that capital letter. Lots of possible readings there. The idea that perhaps it's slightly impersonal compared to other forms of devotional poetry. Is it any God rather than God, capital G? Or is it the opposite? Is it actually, it's very, very personal. We can be informal with each other. We don't need to have that capital G anymore. God is lowercase g. And actually, Debashish's capitalization throughout his poems is actually very interesting. Someone could write an essay on that. The loom imagery here as well, the loom of light, looms occur throughout the poems in quite interesting ways. And here one thinks of Kabir, I think, of course, Kabir the Weaver. We think of Sant poetry, which also reflects on mortality, the material body, and that is doomed to die. But also here it's God that weaves the universe. And again, you know, Kabir in his poems is very anti-institutional religion. He's against the capital G in God in a way. He has a much sort of more primal, instinctive approach to accessing the divine. So here that lowercase g in God makes a lot of sense, I think. But on the whole, you know, there are these poems that reflect this sort of ghazal background, but a lot more of the poems to me speak to the kind of classical Hindi tradition, which is what I work on. So I'm biased. I work primarily in classical Hindi or Braj Bhasha. And so that's where I saw a lot of resonance in Debashish's work. And so again, just so we're all on the same page, when people talk about classical Hindi, we're thinking of sort of two entangled threads. On the one hand, we have bhakti poetry, so religious devotional poetry, with an emphasis on participation in the divine, in terms of love, in terms of play. The imagery is often pointing to Krishna and Radha, who you see in this painting and throughout the poems. And the poetry of figures like Surdas, who is evoked in this collection, is really sort of turning towards the sensory, the embodied, the pleasure of the senses. And then tied up with this, we have the Riti tradition, Riti aesthetics, which was a form of early modern court poetry in Hindi. Riti can be translated as mannerist, because it was a highly codified system, a sort of, you know, poetry as a science that has very specific metaphors and ornaments that were adapting older Sanskrit systems of poetry. And personally, one of the things I found really exciting about this collection is Riti poetry hasn't really been popular for a very long time. And so it was quite encouraging and exciting to see aspects of that tradition manifesting in new forms in this very contemporary collection. So I just want to pick out a couple of instances where that resonated to me. So again, here's a quotation from the poem Lost. Beneath dark palm trees by the riverside, you press the abashed light to a bruise, as deep as the Tamala grove, as deep as your darkness, O Lord. And this idea of the bruising of the light, the bruising of the abashed light, to play with the idea of the darkness of the dark Lord who appears throughout. So this is Krishna, Syam, the god and the lover whose body is as dark as a rain cloud, in contrast to the light, luminescent golden body of Radha. So this imagery was a favored motif in both Bhakti and Riti poetry. And so it was really interesting to see it coming out again in this new form. Debashish's attention to color is really exciting. It, of course, evokes the paintings. But in particular, you know, in Riti poetics, you often have the idea of green because the blue of Krishna melts into the yellow of Radha's body. And so in the blurring of these lovers' bodies, you get the color green. So again, what I like here is this idea of bruising of the body, which again gestures to a tradition of wounds in love. So in lovemaking and love play, lovers are often scarred by their lovemaking, with the crescent moon marks of nails, with the bloodshot red eyes at dawn because the lover has been awake all night. So love leaves its trace on the body, and it leaves its trace through color and through bruising. And so to me, all of this was kind of getting picked up on in interesting ways to express the intimacy within these paintings. So actually, just if we step away from these poems, just to think of that longer tradition, and just to give you some examples for those of you who perhaps aren't necessarily reading poetry from the 17th century, just wanted to give you a couple of examples to show you how I think there is this longer history here. So this is by the poet Lahiri, who was, the master poet in many ways of the 17th century. I'm also going to talk about Keshav Das as well. There were a couple of really fantastic poets here. So this is just one of his couplets. So let's have a listen. So, Chinaku chalati tatukati chinaku, buja pritama garadari, chari atan dekatagata, biju chata sinari. So if we just think literally what is going on here in English, one moment moves, stops one moment, arm beloved, neck casting, standing rooftop looks rain clouds, lightning, brilliant, like woman. And of course, you have to then rearrange the syntax in your head. So this is Rupert Snell's translation. He's done a translation of Lahiri's couplets recently. Now shining forth, now shrinking back, arm round his neck, girl on a rooftop, cloud gazing, lightning bright. So those of you who have read Debashish's poetry, I think, will instantly recognize a kind of consonance between these themes. And of course, this poem was painted routinely. Lahiri's very difficult, challenging couplets were imagined by artists. So here we have the lover's embrace looking out into the sky, looking at the storm cloud. And one of the important aspects of reading the poetry with the paintings is it guides you into a reading of the painting. Often these paintings are very busy, they are full of different elements, and the poem, if you return to the couplet, steers your imagination, your interpretation in particular, to that intimate moment between the lovers, where again, they are staring at the dark cloud with the lightning, which again will invoke that dark storm cloud body of Krishna with the bright lightning of Radha's body. So again, there is a routine going back and forth between these images. And poets did think a lot about these connections between seeing and poems. So Keshav Das, who was perhaps the biggest name in Riti poetry in his time, and prepared a manual for poets, the Rasika Priya, which was heavily illustrated as well. He talks about the possibility of feeling the intensity of love through seeing a painting. And this was an explicit category of meetings of lovers. So if you couldn't meet your lover in person, you could still meet them through a painting. And so this is my translation of one of his verses. So though she pulls her eyes away, nonetheless, heart and mind, she is drenched with love. Droplets of sweat overcome her face. She bristles, her heart seized with trembling. How to describe her, Keshav Das, overpowered so, drowning in a sea of shame. Just from seeing a picture of Hari, so Krishna, my friend, she feels like he has grasped her arm. So the power of seeing an image of your lover and feeling him on your body, in your body. So again, this is something that the painter is picking up on. So here, this woman with her gestured arm pointing at the image of Krishna, which is making her friend freak out. She is sort of pointing out and giving us this commentary. Look how she is completely overwhelmed in her body by looking just at his painting. So again, to me, Debashish's work really taps into this longer tradition. One painting that he picked up on and wrote really beautiful reflections on was a Ragamala painting, Gauri Ragini, and it's a particularly fascinating image. And I really liked how Debashish sort of unpacks it and interprets it in so many different ways. I'm writing a book on Ragamala painting and poetry at the moment, so I was thrilled by this. Just to give a bit of context, this is a longer tradition of visualizing a musical piece and putting that visualization into painting, into poetry. So that visualization in Sanskrit is called a chana. The text up at the top of the painting that Debashish selected, this text in the box at the top, that we have a translation of that by the Ragamala scholar Ganguly, who said, "She is putting on her ears ornaments of mango blossoms made beautiful by the voice of a cuckoo. She has a shining complexion and has a sweet and delicate voice. Such indeed is Gauri, spoken of by the poet Kola." So actually, this verse really is about this one little bit in the middle of the painting where she is applying a flower behind her ear. But that shouldn't stop us. And as you can see, the painter didn't stop there. He went and covered all of this different and all the different aspects of the scene. He included other figures, and Debashish really explores and unpacks who these other figures are beautifully. And this is what a lot of people did. People, I think now, one of the challenges with this genre, with these paintings, with this poetry, which people are now pushing up against, is people see it as formulaic and stale and uncreative. And this is just not true. One thing that you can see is poets playing with the imagery, unpacking different aspects. So different Ragini, Dhanashri. Dhanashri is a famous one because she is usually depicted as a woman drawing an image of her lover who she misses. So you can see her doing that here. That image comes from a Sanskrit text from around 1600, the Sangita Darpana, which is actually quoted on that earlier painting I just showed you. So here we have this definition: Dhanashri, whose bosom is washed by streams of tears, with a tear still on her white cheeks, pained by the separation, with a complexion dark like a blade of durva grass, charming, is busy painting the portrait of her lover. Now, what I want to stress is, first of all, the painter has interpreted this. And usually when painters did this, they didn't want to get into the nuts and bolts of how someone is weeping, etc., because there are a lot of weeping Raginis. Instead, they focused on the iconography of a woman painting, a woman drawing. But not all poets did that. Some poets went in a completely different direction. So there was a Hindi poet who read this verse and went in a completely different direction, just like Debashish did, and actually interpreted it in a different way. So this is one of my favorite interpretations of this same image, but here she is no longer painting, she's no longer drawing. The poet has given up on that idea. So here we have, in a garden near the house of love, she keeps herself fresh with cold water. To reduce the anguish of her body worn thin, the woman sits and does not speak of her pain. Recollecting the emotions of her heart, her limbs are cremated by passion in the fire of separation. Without his beauty, Dhanashri is wretched. A stream of water flows from her lotus eyes. So what the poet's done is he's really wanted to focus on the emotional intensity of it. The idea that she looks calm on the outside, but inside is burning up, literally. She's sitting by cool water, but she is on fire. In particular, we have this beautiful line, the third line, Manabhavana ki sudha ayagai, virhagana anga ananga dahai. Her limbs are cremated by passion in the fire of separation. So again, what Debashish's work reminds us is that there is so much scope for agency, creativity, play with these paintings and the poems that speak to them, that illuminate them. And finally, I just wanted to look at this quotation from the poem An Absent Portrait. It's right at the beginning of the poem. As slow as absence, round the bend of moments, the purple shadow of the gorge turns the slide of water into dusk's wallow in a languor of missing the sun. And I just think that's absolutely beautiful. But it's also interesting to me because this entry into the vignette, into the visualization, begins with the landscape, begins with the gorge, the movement of the water, the colors, the purple shadow, etc. Beautiful. And that's really quite different from what I see in the early modern poetry. And it's mostly because the poets that I work with tend to really zoom in on the body, emotions, feeling, the action in the foreground, the person. They do describe landscape imagery, but when they do it differently. And they are trying to convey a particular thing, often a particular theme rather, through a particular strategy that has been defined and codified. And I think, to me, the way Debasish looks at these paintings and acknowledges the landscape is because, to me, his interpretation is shaped by the visuality and a way of seeing that is modern, that is contemporary, that is also shaped by art history and Byung Goswami's work and so on. And so actually there is a very kind of contemporary edge to this way of seeing and engaging through poetry. So in a nutshell, even though there is this longer history here that I'm so excited about, I also feel that it's not just, part of the same old thing at all. What we are seeing here is something that is very much shaped by contemporary ways of thinking about art history, thinking about these paintings and visuality in a way that's very distinctive and personal. So I will stop there. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Richard. That was wonderful, and thank you for giving us that overview of some of the historical context around the paintings, and certainly some of the more personal interpretations and readings that you've made there, which I think we are very rich. And I'm sure Debasish, you want to respond to that. I wonder, just for the interest of time, whether we move on to our next two speakers, and then Debasish, are you happy to come back once we've heard our next two speakers? Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I'm very happy to do that. Let's hear all our speakers, and maybe I can gather up all of that and try and respond to them.
That sounds perfect. Well, thanks so much, and thank you, Richard. So I'm going to now pass on to Pradipta Mukherjee, who is coming in from Calcutta, I understand. Pradipta, over to you.
Good evening, Joseph. Good evening, all the distinguished panelists for today's event. Am I audible to all of you? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Audible?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope I'm audible to all of you. Thank you very much. It was indeed wonderful listening to Professor Richard Williams. Thank you so much for that wonderful, description of Tether, that light. Well, I would like to let you know what I think about this brilliant collection of poems by my friend and colleague, Debasish Lahiri. As we all know, we have read Tether, that light. It derives its inspiration from a maze of Indian miniature paintings. And like the poet himself, we are drawn into a rich and complex painterly world where we immerse in those miniature canvases. And those canvases echo and resonate throughout his ekphrastic collection of poems, evocatively titled Tether, That Light. He has creatively borrowed from the love legend of Radha and Krishna. And my focus today for the grand launch of Tether, That Light by Debasish Lahiri, would be the Radha Krishna poems in his book. Professor Richard Williams has also mentioned, he has given us his insights on the Radha Krishna section of the poems. Now, not all the Radha Krishna poems are based on paintings, like Finding Radha, Radha by Alien Water, Radha Reverie in Eventide. Each and every poem is very beautifully titled, and the Radha Krishna poems in this section are entirely the outcome of the poet's rich and vivid imagination. But the poems in the dusk triptych section, like Lost, Dusk, Surprise, Astray, I'm sure Joseph will be able to share one or two of the paintings from the dusk triptych section. There has been a grand appropriation of the Radha Krishna myth found in Indian miniature canvases, and Debashish goes for a very close reading or reworking or invoking of those Mughal, Rajasthani, Pahari, and Deccani miniature canvases, breaking the boundaries of time and space in a rich and ever-evolving cultural mosaic. Now, in this magical process of reworking and invoking, there is so much of research involved, study of myth, folklore, vernacular poetry, art history, religious and mythological stories. What Debashish achieves is his own brilliant appropriation of those intricate miniature paintings through the medium of imagistic poetry or ekphrastic poetry. What intrigued me in this wonderful transcreation of image to word is the depth and distance he maintains with miniature art, the delicate balance of symmetry and sensuality that he evinces. And Debashish, I think he states very clearly in his introduction, he says, I sought to complete a cycle that had begun with the imaginative rendition of a poetic text by an artist in the 16th and 17th centuries. Word, image, and a return to word. Yeah, that is what he writes. So this is how he tries to describe the ekphrastic poetry that he creates, the extraordinary beauty and mystery of Mughal, Pahari, and later Deccani school of paintings, the Ragamala paintings based on ragas or patterns of musical notes. They happen to be his precise focus. Therefore, time of the day or season and the melody and the vibrancy of colors, they reign supreme in Debashish's verse. And he aptly titles this collection, Tether, That Light, the precise ability of a great painter or artist to restrain, control, and ensnare light. Though this collection is a tribute to Indian miniature paintings that have evolved as chroniclers of knowledge over time, I think Debashish is a poet who is much inspired by European art and European art history, particularly Impressionist paintings and paintings of Claude Monet, Van Gogh, Cézanne, which is more prominently felt in his previous collection, Poppies in the Post. Now, Debashish, with his very modernist sensibilities, has always had this curious blend of diverse energies. And I completely agree with Ranjit Haskote when he says that he has this curious blend of diverse energies. But the reason why I say this is this curious blending of multiple energies, diverse energies, because if one could locate a strong influence of Deccani school of paintings that was practiced in, say, Golconda, Hyderabad, Bijapur, and Aurangabad, there are these mystic overtones of the Deccani school of paintings that have always intrigued us in their ability to capture the sensual bodies of female figurines, their symmetry and their sensuality, the rhythmic delicacy of Persian and Islamic cultures, the restraint of European and Turkish portraitures, all seem to reverberate in his Radha Krishna poems, and it gives Tether, That Light its very fine balance. There is often a very fine juxtaposition of sensual and spiritual language to describe the ecstasy of love. As Professor Richard Williams has already mentioned, they are not just conversation with the past or just devotional poetry, but they are also very intensely personal. So you have here this fine juxtaposition of the sensual and the spiritual, and to describe the ecstasy of love, the intimacy, the bliss, the pain and agony of separation. And Radhakrishna's disregard for imposed social boundaries in love, sacred or profane, the act of transgression, the moment of joyous union are all beautifully presented through Debashish's verse. There is often this subtle hint of the elevation of sensual passion to spiritual virtue. The moment of union is at times preceded by ecstasy or completely thwarted, as I would like to read from his poem, A Painter's Distraction. Maybe we can show the slide of A Painter's Distraction here. This is how he writes. O Rai and Krishna, only the absence of two desires and the ache of one body's burden remains in my painting. I have thwarted your union. Let the bloom of the lotus be the only witness of your inevitable union, but on some other painter's canvas. This is from A Painter's Distraction. Now, if the poems are based on particular painting as the one I referred to, or the poems in the Dusk Triptych section, I think the poet's verse is in complete harmony with the miniature paintings. The legend of Radha and Krishna, rich in emotion, has been reinterpreted and retold in India countlessly after the success of Jayadev's influential 12th century classic Geet Govinda. Unrivaled in expression and style, it took India by storm for its stark portrayal of sensuality. 200 years after Jayadev's Geet Govinda, Vidyapati's composition stands out for its sensual and tender celebration of the many moods of Sri Radha's love as she negotiates her relationship with Krishna. It reminds me of Debashish's previous collection, Tinder Tender, Poems of Love and Loitering. Any act of reading plunges us into a network of such textual relations. To interpret a text, here in context, Debashish's highly evocative poems, is to discover its meanings, to trace those intricate and powerful correlations through intertexts. Often when Debashish writes about Radha waiting by the banks of the Yamuna, the tenderness, elegance, and sensuality of the portrayal, again reminiscent of the Deccani school of paintings, have touched me, but the poet may have been inspired in this section by the Pahari school of paintings. Canvases from Guler, Pasholi, Kangra, Chamba, and Garhwal. A famous painting of Radha waiting for Krishna in Kunjavan by Raja Ravi Varma may have also echoed as intertext while he was silently composing his poems. A Radha who is ubiquitous in her role as the supreme lover and devotee enlightens Raja Ravi Varma's canvas. Legends have made us aware of this transgressive, adulterous, and incestuous elements of her erotic attachment to Krishna. Debashish's due symbolism in his poem Finding Radha brings into play the very idea of symbolizing mystery associated with Radha, a Radha who is unmindful of social proprieties and unbounded by conventions. Debashish recognizes the subtle nuances of Radha's energy, having thoroughly observed her beauty of body and spirit and her unconditional love for Krishna. Radha's body becomes a site for philosophical and mythological musings. In her love and longing, Radha follows her heart, her instincts to seek union with her dark god of love. Hindu religious texts may see this as the union of the human soul with divine love, the union of the Atma with the Paramatma, or the Jivatma in pursuit of the Paramatma. From Bhagavad Puran to Geet Govinda, Geet Govinda has had its beautiful rendition in Orissa School of Painting depicting majestic landscapes of Eastern India, bold brush strokes, Krishna Leela, Sanskrit poetry, Bangla poetry, Urdu poetry, poets like Gyan Das, Govinda Das, Vidyapati, Chandi Das, Surdas, and Debashish refers to Surdas in his collection. All have excelled in composing timeless lyrics on Radha Krishna's trysts, love and union, longing and abandonment, pain, loss, and separation. Tether That Light invokes this very rich tradition of kavya, or literary and poetic texts, whether it is Geet Govinda or Vaishnav Padavali, a long line of bards and balladeers, not just miniature paintings, but bhakti movement and bhakti poets, or the Vaishnav tradition associated with bhakti yoga, to performing arts with vocalists like Pandit Yash Raj, Thumris, ghazals, or say bhajans and kirtans from Bengal, all exist as intertexts. In Radha's grace and elegance, Tether That Light allures to Indian dance forms like Bharatnatyam, Kuchipudi, Mohiniyattam from South India. And Tether That Light is an integral part of a larger socio-cultural context or textuality. Whatever meaning we discover may occur through a network of prior texts that provide the context of possible meanings and our recognition of such meanings. Tether, with that very newness of language, is noted for its fluidity, historicity, the contemporaneity, the moving between texts, not just the delicate interweaving of a Rajasthani or Pahari painter's canvas to a poet's painterly text, but it is something much more. Its plethora of culturally rich intertexts that Tether brings into play is brilliant and striking, and Debashish's attempt to capture these exciting, fleeting moments of the senses, like any impressionist painting, and the myriad ways in which love's pleasures and pains are felt before retrospective recollection is absolutely remarkable. As his poems on Radha and Krishna try to regain a lost control over emotional life, love's inevitable confusions, the several stages of love, from Purvarag, Anurag, Avishar, Milan, Viraho, and the seasons that are related to it, owing to the ambience or subtle moods they create, from Bhakti Ras to Madhur Ras, Shringar Ras to Karun Ras, Shanta Ras to Bhakti Ras again. The poems are noted for their balance and poise. Beautiful pictorial depictions, nature imagery, and obsession with colors, as the distinguished art historian B.N. Goswami has written the preface of the book has identified, or one could go to the extent of, say, the music in his verse combined with the melody of colors is visible, heard, and felt in the poet's canvas as we get recurrent visions of the pristine landscapes of Braj, Vrindavan, Yamuna, and the Tamal Grove. The imageries are exquisitely magical to the extent of becoming surreal and adds to our sheer delight. I shall read a few lines from his poem Lost, where Radha speaks and Yamuna is evocatively personified as human, the river Yamuna. I quote, "Come and take your crown off, O Lord, and make the stars above the Yamuna blind on their void perch. Still the flow of Yamuna with your hand on my breast, that she might not flow downstream and tell every village in Braj about what the Tamal Grove heard and the absent moon might have seen tonight." And in the last stanza, the poet writes, "Night shall be long and out of time, and sight shall be possible without light," unquote. So to keep to the time, I'll just try to sum up that. I'll just mention another poem in Rising, what he says. "The night of this joyous union and Shringar has made way for the morning." I quote, "How do you wake up like morning, dappled from the bed of the god of love, the pollen of his sweat on the petals of your skin," unquote. How the Shringar Ras leads to infinite and eternal bliss, and their mystical union in Rising is the ultimate rasa. No wonder in the poem Astray, Radha fails in her duty to escort Krishna. The poet pens his verse thus, I quote, Radha has gone escorting Krishna home on Lord Nanda's orders. A short distance, but none of them have returned home yet. And evenings are prohibited these days, I'm told, except in miniatures, unquote. This is from Astray. However, the pleasure of union conversely contains a feeling of virahu or separation. In the last miniature's testament, he rewrites of this drama of rasas in that theater of your body, in the act of disrobing, which is not carried away by force. The act has the power to exalt or transport with joy. The poet goes on to utter, I quote, the more the dark god advances, the more he drowns in the memory of your body, in your Yamuna, where you dip your body's happiness every day. Unquote. This is not an impetuous dalliance. There is the romantic playfulness of the Rasalila, Radha herself being an ocean of rasas to the soulfulness of Krishna Priya's undying love and Debashish's mystic allure of her depictions in ekphrastic poetry. The poet may have been inspired by Surdas, Kesavadas, Tulsidas, Amir Khosrow, and Faizi, Akbar's court poet during Akbar's reign. Tether that light exists in a rich socio-historical context, and given the subject of his poems, the variety of cultural intertexts and the socio-historical texts that exist in the field, from Geet Govinda to Vaishnav Padavali, Bhagavad Puran to Chaitanya Charitamrita, not just literary texts but performing arts, the periphery of Tether that light is rather vast, and it foregrounds those emblematic imageries, those significant iconographies from different art forms, the transition from one medium to the other effortlessly, flawlessly. And I'm sure such ekphrastic poems will expand the dialogue around recontextualizations and transcreations further. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Pradipta, for your very attentive reading and for bringing out some of those aspects that Richard also picked up on around transmediality, around the musicality of the poetry and the images. And perhaps we can pick up on some of those points in the questions at the end. Thank you so much. Well, without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Yogesh Patel, who's here with us for his response to Debashish's poetry. Yogesh. You're on mute, Yogesh. Can you unmute yourself?
Is that all right now? Can you hear me?
That's perfect. We can hear you loud and clear.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Joseph and Debashish, for making me a part of this launch. So I'm going to straight away dive into it because of the time as well, I'm aware of. To allow us to approach Lahiri's poems, let me first talk about writing a poem, not about the paintings, but with it. In the post-war period, formalism in arts was becoming rigid in the hands of poets like Frank O'Hara, known as a poet among painters. Expressist poems gained more ground as they challenged orthodoxy and stiff canons. These poets believe that the visual art also exposes the makeup of them as observers. They bring themselves to the table. Therefore, the form also offers them to express viewpoints and angles as a panoramic composition saturated with the poetic feeling. Here, Lahiri brings us such facets in his poem, stepping into their ambience to tether the missing light with its own narrative. Like O'Hara and Auden, his emphasis is also not surrendering to the descriptions as this original art form had established. To that would be a return to a compliance to formalism of a sort. To understand Debasish and make a point, please bear with me while I read O'Hara's poem to you, Why I Am Not a Painter, in which he illustrates how descriptive evasion works all without referencing the painting. Why I'm not a painter? Frank O'Hara. I'm not a painter. I'm a poet. Why? I think I would rather be a painter, but I'm not. Well, for instance, Mike Goldberg is starting a painting. I drop in. Sit down and have a drink, he says. I drink. We drink. I look up. Yes, sardines in it. Yes, it needed something there. Oh, I go. And the days go by and I drop in again. The painting is going on and I go. And the days go by. I drop in. The painting is finished. Where's sardines? All that's left is just lettuce. It was too much, Mike says. But with me, one day I'm thinking of a color, orange. I write a line about orange. Pretty soon, it is a whole page of words, not lines. Then another page. There should be so much more, not of orange, of words, of how terrible orange is and life. Days go by. It's even in prose. I'm a real poet. My poem is finished, and I haven't mentioned orange yet. It's 12 poems. I call it Oranges. And one day, in a gallery, I see Mike's painting called Sardines. In the poem, sardines are creating a dry but are not described, let alone found. This vagueness and abstract presence are what I suppose Lahiri means when he writes in his introduction, I wanted to write this light. As in the above poem, just as sardines have no shape, light for Lahiri also has no definite shape. When God said, let there be light, he didn't have paintings or miniatures in his mind. Light meant life, but the light not only allows life, it also enlightens our souls with what we have perceived or what we can perceive. The time is also untethered and may think it can't be trapped, but the light can trap it with pigments. What Lahiri wants to say in that memories reflect as paintings, and in the parallax, paintings reflect on the memories as he expresses. Hence, he adds himself to this space to arrest the playful light in words, adding the essence of subjects, events, and landscapes. His new viewpoint in the parallax is expressed with 3 sets of poems for each painting. One is on the legend, more as an observer. One is through artist's lens, even adding more to it than what is visible. And finally, the third one is juxtaposed with poet's own contemporary context. One such example of the such point is found in the poem Death by Dawn, and in these lines, a car horn sounds suddenly like one groaning in sleep, fearing morning has come too soon, or a rickshaw mentioned in a poem Pen and Brush Rain. Additionally, you will discover that even artists of some of these paintings are also a game and indulge in text, as seen in the paintings of Ragini Gaudi. An unknown artist describes Ragini in his own words at the top of the painting, which may differ in other renderings of the content. He paints this as per his text to a point, but a midway in his painting departs from it to add a personal take. Now think of Lahiri stepping in this as a bard. He enriches the work with the own imagination strip. Ragini's friends are not named in the original, but Lahiri names them and creates a narrative around them. One drawback of the Akash's poems is that you have to refer to the painting to check how much the poet is still with it and what is that extra which he's summoning by my first encounter, not exactly ecstatic, but something along the ethos of it, was with the French poet Gilwig's poems entitled The Euclideans. His poems were on the simple geometrical shapes, like a line, a triangle, a circle, or a square. They were very innovative, but not requiring a constant check on the shapes because we are all familiar with them. He was surprisingly mythical and expanded their philosophical meaning. In contrast, in Lahiri, we already have detailed myths in the pre-existing miniatures. However, he is not restrained by them. He expands their scope differently, with a loose adhering to the form, as explained earlier, and we see it in the Ragini poems. The most striking miniature he opens his salvo with is that of suicide by hanging, more aptly captured by Lahiri in words as a chandelier with no light. With it, the poet is relaxed to explore expansively, as mentioned, because the poem is also not restrained by the legends of, say, Krishna, as in other miniatures. Further on, for a scholar, it should make a fascinating study into how these complexities work. The poem contradicts tragically with these haunting lines. The pitcher of wine that dyed the grains of snow in my heart's winter, but failed to portray morning, shall roll about in laughter. To thoroughly enjoy this collection, you will need to find out more about the paintings used for these poems. I feel the book could have benefited from the details on the paintings and their narratives. Take, for instance, the miniature of Mughal-speaking tree in this collection. Considered from Golconda in Deccan, the paintings may be the work of Turkmen culture. The legends may have come from the Islamic mythical land of Waqwa. The story of Alexander the Great is also integral to this tree. Weird it may sound, but there are 82 creature heads hanging from this speaking tree. Yes, someone counted them somewhere. At the foot of the tree, you may have bushes with animal heads as flowers. The trunk is all sporting intertwined snakes. Hence, the poet is presented with some unlimited scope of imagination if he wanted to exploit. I find his poems, the language not only lyrical, but also very bountiful, paced and pulsating with measured timbre. If Alexander found the speaking tree at the end of the world, the poet stands in his shoes and asks, was there a greater folly known to man than chasing his own shadow on the trail to the end of the world? Similarly, Sursagar is a storyboard canvas based on the extraction from a long poem by Surdas and starts again with the text at the beginning. These events provide plenty of raw material for a poet. As Surdas was blind, it provides Lahiri also a challenge to explore a disposition of sound in these poems and less focus on the text. With such rich canvases used for these poems, Lahiri excels whenever he finds more action, multiple subjects, strong atmosphere, and a theater of structures and landscapes, as in his poem on Ragini, Solakamaru miniature or Mughal squirrels miniature. And finally, just as the collection starts with the suicide, a death, it heads to the ending with dying Inayat Khan, with a sketch empty of the flurry of colors, with the X-ray vision of the artist recording the sad decadence. However, we are lucky that Lahiri concludes it with the celebration of Radha Krishna in love. After all, love is the light, and we must tether it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yogesh, for that rich and poetic intervention itself. Thank you so much. I'm conscious. I'll just stop sharing the screen. I'm conscious of time, so I just wanted to perhaps open the floor to Debasish first of all, before moving to any audience questions. And Please, if you're in the audience and you do have some questions, you can also pop them in the chat, perhaps as Debashish responds, and then we'll come to you in the Q&A at the end. But Debashish, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. It's been fascinating actually listening to all three panelists, Richard, Pradipta, and Yogesh holding forth on Tether That Light. Actually, it's wonderful how they have so thoroughly picked on the nuances of the text. I actually was being taken on a little bit of a backward journey when I was actually writing the poems and the processes that I was going through, and how exactly and how sensitively all three of them have actually captured so many aspects of it, all that goes through. I mean, we all know about looking at the poem as a finished product, and they've actually taken, I think, not just me, but also the audience into the smithy of where art is actually created. It's all crafted, where it all comes together. The time that it takes for ideas to gestate and be what they are, and ultimately as they appear on the page. So I think I owe a bit of thanks to all three speakers today for having set the agenda and for having described so powerfully, so beautifully, and so meticulously all the different aspects that have gone into the making of this book, Tether That Light. For me, personally speaking, I will not add to the wonderful insights already shared with you by the speakers. I'll just give you a little, rather simplistic by comparison, idea of how it worked for me. My first look at these paintings was to see them as a very earthy archive of stories, and to divest them of exactly the kind of heraldry and a kind of exalted beauty which kind of separates them as high art from the realms of the ordinary. A lot of what I've tried to do in Tether That Light has to do with bringing it closer to our own context, to our own concerns, to our own time. That journey has taken sometimes 3 poems. It started with 1 poem, as Yogesh was referring to and Richard was referring to, and it has taken 3 poems to come closer to our time and to show how important these paintings were and are to everyday life. They may be, I mean, the presence of the iconic figures of gods and goddesses need not distract us from the fact that these are poems about essential human experience and life. Quite often, they had to use certain motifs, they had to use certain figures which were conventional to their art at that point of time. But you have to understand the rationale behind the use and the way in which painters actually played with the legends themselves. The subtle ways in which they reformulated the legends, they left their own particular signature of ideas in the paintings themselves. So along with, when you call light, by light, I mean, light is both grit in the eye and a gossamer of breathing that ruffles your hair. It's both. That's what you find in these paintings. I mean, Richard talked at length and Pradipta talked at length about Ragamala paintings. Of course, the word raga means or can mean color and mood at the same time. You might say, I've just tried to pick up the luminous signature far above the arc of city lights. Because our vision these days, I mean, when we look at the sun or we look at the moon or we look at the stars, is very limited by the arc of city lights. So above all that, there is an old world of skies, and which is as contemporary today as it was at the time when the paintings were made. So that unchanging nature of the sky, of the light, the origin of that light, is what drives me to bring in such contexts as a lockdown city. Yogesh was mentioning that poem about that speaking tree, and the third poem is actually about a migrant laborer who comes in hoping to find welcome and succor in his own city, and is confronted with empty streets. Interestingly, Pradipta was mentioning a lot about my predilection for, or my preference for, European painting, especially impressionistic, post-impressionistic, surrealistic paintings. I think there's a clear mention of De Chirico in that particular poem, because you have these desolate squares portrayed so wonderful in De Chirico's paintings. And I actually use De Chirico as a kind of an artistic, you might say, shorthand in the poem. And it's actually mentioned when that character talks about, is this a De Chirico city, kind of. He asks that question. So that being said, my idea, and especially also in response to a lot of the comments made about the Radha Krishna poems, especially the last 8 poems in the collection, let me just say again, in a rather simplistic rejoinder to all of that, is that my vote was always with the human. I have no way of knowing or accessing or even describing, I think, the dark lord of love of Krishna. But Radha is very human. And that is where my stakes lay when I wrote those poems. Because I could talk about her as a human being, and as her reactions, as you will find in all the poems, it's always from her point of view. And although we tend to celebrate this wonderful mystical love between Radha and Krishna, let's face it, that Radha was also located in social context as a woman located in Orthodox society, as a woman who has to break down barriers, social barriers, as a woman whose every move and every more is questioned by society. At the same time as it exalts her as the lover of the divine other, meaning Krishna. These complexities, these you might say, as I said, earthy details were the ones that actually preoccupied me. So that is what my essay in this poem was all about. Having always one eye on the clock again. If I'm allowed, Joseph, I'm just going to read one poem from this collection. A lot of poems have been mentioned in this poem, in this meeting. There is one that I want to read about. That is, Yogesh mentioned this in passing about the soul Kamaru. So I will read the last poem from that sequence, that triptych of poems. Yes, which is again a kind of an accentuation of the contemporary. Richard has held forth wonderfully on the long line that has been there and which has been referred to at different instances by me. Thank you, Richard, for making the connections. Pradipta has dwelt at length on the different indigenous traditions of poetry, which have left their imprint upon me. Let's put it this way. And Yogesh has talked about the founding principles, the creative principles of a poet, and how he works from inside out. It's a wonderful way he has shown us exactly how things work, and how one goes out of oneself and then acts, how the outside and the inside meet, the actual poetic process. So I will again try through my reading to accentuate the contemporary. One has to remember that many or most of these poems were written in the year 2020, a year that is memorable for us for all the wrong reasons, but it also was a time for reflection, a time that allowed us to take a look back at ourselves in different ways. So this poem is called Not in Tune. There are hands in the melting asphalt that will bring you down. Do not walk the roads. There are snakes in the grass that will bite your blood. Don't walk off roads. Know where to walk or stray. Do not venture out. Stay in bed. Fling your aubade at your pillow and your matins at the ceiling of the fan's arc. Peer over the edge and see the floor. So far down. Stay in bed. For death is here, there, beneath your bed, and under your chair. Stay in bed till you find him on it and then get dead, imagining the stillness of your exit music. In that closet of regrets. Are these legends to be found on billboards, in empty streets, or does the television, in the afternoon of apartments, uncouth in its loudness, like someone still trying to tell a story to a man who is already fast asleep, drum it deep into us like a fake heartbeat? Leading death a merry dance, charming time out of curfew, needs a music and its garden. Bring on the piper in the theatre of treeless avenues, naked as sunlight, and watch his breathing usher the dusk of a garden in tune. Walk bare feet behind this arras of light over flowers in the field and green shoots that shall assuage the burn of tar on your souls. In this alcove of sequestered song around which a bare city house, the cab that bears my love away every day, and pain that sings like slow falling quiet upon the plucked strings of a harp in its wake shall not fall contrary. She will still be leaving, but my heart music, fluted after her, shall plough a furrow through the air and sound like seawater parting in the solitude of downtown. Was it an echo? Or did I hear death humming in tune too? Shall the piper take death to a dusk by the river? Shall he stop suddenly and let the wind pick up the melody, singing of the pilot dolphin steering the sea up the Ganga? Death's distraction is music enough. Watch it from your window like dusk. Walk out again in the dusk. Let your own music find its garden. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debasish. It's such a moving poem, and thank you for your responses to the panelists today. We've got about 10 minutes remaining of our time together today, and I can see that there's already a question in the chat, but I wanted to invite the questioner, Patel, I think, to come on if you wanted to ask your question on screen. I mean, or would you prefer me to put it to Debasish?
Hi everyone.
Hello.
Hello, I'm from Kolkata, and I'm from one of the students of Vidyasagar College, and Pradipta ma'am is our beloved teacher. So my question is to you, sir. I mean, how do you disconnect yourself from the reality while writing something or getting into a particular world? That's my first question, disconnect. And the second one is the connect. How do you connect yourself to your poetry? I mean, in a personal level. So these are my questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Patel. Joe, do I take the questions together or can I answer her right now?
As you wish. No problem.
Yeah, if you go ahead, Debasish, and then if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Yeah. Sure.
The thing is that Patel, to answer your question, there is no disconnect, or rather a reconnection, because you're always a part of it. And as I said, it's not just, you have to imagine that the time that you're writing about, in this case, there's a huge gulf in time. One has to understand that. One has to look at it in the way of, just look at it as any other work a day, a day in your life, perhaps. Because, the human element never changes. It has never changed. The emotions that we go through in a given day, in our lives, they're all the same. Their trappings may have changed a bit. We dress differently. There's a lot more technology in our lives. But once you get through that, once you look through it, the rest of it is all there. It's all the same. If we are stood up by someone with whom we have an appointment, we are obviously angry. So, when you imagine one of Radha's moves, when he has been stood up by Krishna, you can actually see, you can just think, if someone stood you up, how would you have felt? So, it's a very simple reality, actually. And now to look at all these things as human possibilities, things that might have actually happened to you today in our world. As I said, only the trappings are different, but the essential emotions and reactions of people remain the same. So there is actually no disconnection. You do not have to disconnect with one world in order to connect with the other. You have to find the fuse that connects the two worlds together. That's all. And as a poet, wherever the world is, whether it is 500 or 1,000 years ago or just yesterday, doesn't really matter. It's the important thing is, can you get into the envelope of the emotion? And the emotion creates its own timescape, its own space around it. So once you are in that, you don't need to worry about the rest of it. It will come to you. So as you have seen, if you have read the poems, you will find that I haven't written it, although the scholars here, the writers here today on the panel, they have outlined the influence of so much. And there has been influence, conscious and unconscious, in my writing. You really cannot go about writing poetry as if it's a scholastic amalgam of different details. You can't do that. It's just that you got into a moment. You tried to feel what it felt like at that moment, you personally, as a writer, as a poet, and just go ahead and write that. So, and then when it comes out as words on a page, that's where the rhythms, the sounds, the influences, little things that you pick up from your favorite writers whom you've read, that's when they come together unconsciously. But first and foremost, the attempt should always be, I think, to get into the emotional scape of the situation that you're trying to depict. As I said, it might be yesterday, it might be 1,000 years ago. Doesn't really matter. I hope that answers your question.
Yes,
Thank you
yes.
again, Payal.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for your question, Payal, and thanks to Debasish for your answer. It struck me that there's a connection here, I think, between what you said about the earthly archive of stories and the way in which you relate that to a more vernacular connection across time. It struck me that really what the power of your poetry is to bridge the contemporary and the past in such a way that it becomes part of our present, and certainly kind of visibilizes and enacts that sense of connection between the two times, breaking down time as not something that is about distance, but about connection. So that really struck me in your answer just now and in the poem. So thank you. I wondered whether there were any other questions that the audience would like to ask. Please feel free to unmute yourselves and come on in. Sushanta, you have a question.
Yeah, I just go through all these lectures and all this. I want to ask Debasish how he controlled this fragmented time in his journey and recreated this Radha in this modern time again as a human being. That's I want to know from him that he has also here connected the paintings and the all this our ancient mythology about the Radha Krishna. And now in this postmodern period, he has also constructed Radha with his own sentiment. So that one, I want to ask him this question about how he did it, these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sushantada. Thank you so much for joining this event and asking a question. I think control is an illusion. I think control is an illusion. We can only have illusions of control. To say that I have controlled the fragmentariness of history, of time, of experience, is to absolutely, I think, overstate the fact. In fact, I have been controlled, as I've written in my dedication. I've been controlled by the light. You allow yourself to be a part of the flow of time, submerging yourself in time, and see how you come out. As I said, writing is quite often, especially this particular collection, has been writing out of your comfort zone. So controlling and is perhaps not the word I would use. It's how I've been able to, as I said, stay loyal to certain bases. I could call it that way. As I said, the earthiness, the humanity of whatever is around us. The paintings, as all our speakers today have outlined and have reiterated, is they're just mere triggers. At the end of it, you just do not do a one-to-one correspondence. If I read a poem, can I actually be given a proper description? It's almost like a catalog, a museum catalog. It's not that. So again, it's not very helpful as a museum catalog, the poems. But as I said, the poems find their triggers from where they take off from the painting, something in the painting. So, and probably, I think it was Richard who mentioned the fact that that poem about Krishna starts in the gorge with the landscape, not with the central figure, but it chooses to start at the farthest point of the painting. Something that is far into the background. From there, from the sounding gorge, that's where the poem starts, or its journey, and kind of works back to the central figure. So again, control is probably not there. The fact that there is no control is, I think, one of the things that might be picked up by readers, might be liked by readers of Tether That Light. Personally, I've not tried to control anything, except that you write in your style, perhaps the way in which the lines have come out. You've tried to be as niggardly in your expression. So you try to convey more by using fewer words, more significant words, structured in a certain way. But beyond that, no control. I've been controlled by forces above and beyond me. Thank you, Shirandula.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Debasish, for your response, and thank you, Sushanta, for your question.
Joseph, may I just interrupt for a moment? Yeah, I was since Sushanta was asking about the depictions of Radha in cultural archetypes, in myths and folklores. I would just add, it's not a question. I would just like to make a comment on Sushantada's very wonderful observation, how Debasish tries to resituate Radha in contemporary times through his verse. So Sushantada, we can also look at it this way, that he's trying to, in his poems, Debasish is trying to look at Radha's historical situatedness. It's a kind of a comment on Radha's historical situatedness in Indian myth, folklores, scriptures, Puranas, and her depictions in Indian literature and poetry. And there are several iconicities, multiple iconicities that Tether That Light alludes to while it tries to depict Radha in all her avatars. It may be the Nitya Priya Radha, it may be Radha as the Abhisharika Naika, Radha as the Abhisharika Naika or the Ashta Naika, because of Radha's, her own provisions, her vulnerabilities, her emotions, how Radha is alluded to as the Ladini Shakti in his poems. So it's not just the Krishna Priya Radha, okay, in Tether That Light, but Radha as the Abhisharika Naika, Radha as the Ladini Shakti in Indian myths and folklores. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Pradipta. And Sushanta, you wanted to come back, perhaps?
No, thank you, Pradipta. You beautifully narrated what I want to ask. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Well, we've unfortunately rather quickly come to the end of our time together, and I just wanted to really thank the panelists, and in particular Debasish, for coming along today and for writing this wonderful collection of poetry. Debasish, before we go, is there some information on where people can buy a copy of your poetry?
I think I'll have a little bit information by Saturday. I had a chat with my publisher only yesterday, and Amazon the link is going to be going live by Saturday. So I think I'll be able to share it with you for everybody in the UK who wants to buy the book to buy it online.
That's fantastic, and we can get an email out to all the participants who came along today once you've got that information, Debasish. So do forward it on to me, and I'll send an email out. Just remains for me to thank everyone for coming today, for the audience participation, for your questions, and thanks again to particular to Richard, to Yogesh, to Pradipta, and to Debasish, of course. So thank you all, and have a wonderful
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Joe.